Hey YouTube, Moose Cow here. It has been a while since we concluded Operation Tannenberg, and Madman and myself have been very busy trying to playtest a few Kings and Kaisers changes and also prepped for the BBR Chicago tournament, which is 8 days away currently as I record this video. So, been really busy with that, but I figured I would do just a little video kind of discussing some changes that we have been playtesting with, and for the most part we have been very happy with most of these, but after we conclude BBR Shy, we will be focusing back on Kings and Kaisers, and the goal is to have is that we will update the manual to version 1.5, and we will be updating some cards in the card deck, and then once those are ready, they will be made available again for people to purchase once they are ready. And for those that have cards and have a manual, we will be sending the needed replacements for that when the time comes. So if you have a 1.4 manual, you will get a 1.5 manual, and if you have a card deck, you will get the cards that are affected that we change. For the most part, a lot of it is going to be some rewording and incorporation of these rules. But after the tournament, the idea is that Madman and I are going to do some more playtesting, at least a few more games, to fully lock in these changes and make sure that we're super happy about it. But I figured, at least for for those who have the game, make this video and kind of give you an idea of what changes to go ahead with in your game if you decide to have a Kings and Kaisers game, or if you're not, just being a fly on the wall and paying attention to the development of this game, so to speak. I've been really hard at work at the manual currently, updating it and making a lot of corrections, and I now have a system that will allow me to hopefully make it so that this is version 1.5 will be the final edition of the rule book of Kings and Kaisers 1. That is the goal. I do not want to have to keep updating one with more corrections of errors and so forth, but the point being is that what we're doing right now, once we're able to implement the changes, I will be able to double check them and make sure everything is implemented properly, and so I can tell Madman, yes, go ahead, print, and then we'll have a locked, awesome 1.5 version of Kings and Kaisers that will be a little more balanced and have more rule clarifications and changes and so on and so forth in it. So, without further ado, I'm just gonna kind of get into it, stumble my way through this. I got every change marked on the board, and just kind of stumble my way through this. Maybe bounce around a little bit, but anyway. Here's an idea. If you have Kings and Kaisers, these are and you want to play a game, these are the changes that we are playtesting with right now, and most of these, I would say, are for sure going to be in 1.5, and maybe some of these we might tweak a little bit, but for the time being, if you have Kings and Kaisers and you want to play a game, I highly recommend to add these rule changes, caveats, or setup changes, etc., and I'll go over everything. But I would recommend doing that. So far, Madman and I have gotten a playtesting with most of these, and we enjoyed it quite a bit. So, yeah, just gonna get into it. So again, if you're playing Kings and Kaisers, here are the changes. First things first, I'm just kind of going to go over a little bit of a dice change. This is not mandatory, but I figured I would address that this is what I'm going to be doing with my game, with my copy of the game at least. I color code my dice. I have dice from Warlord Games, and they're the same 10mm size. And I decided to go ahead and change out the green, and I've gotten blue dice. You don't have to do this with your game. You can use whatever dice you want. I personally really like the out-of-box 10mm size, and the out-of-box dice are like this, these black ones. And I personally, for my copy, just so that everything is square and exactly the same, in terms of how the dice are, I got some black Warlord dice. the corners are just, the only difference is that the pips on the originals are a little bigger, but the corners are a little more harsher in the originals. So just for my copy of the game, I've upgraded my black dice. You can absolutely still use the out-of-box 1914 black dice if you have them. And then I am changing, currently at least, my twos, there we go, will now be blue dice. And the only reason I had green being 2 was to kind of blend it with the young grasshopper style of hit dice, but again, you also have kind of a Christmassy color with you know, greens and red dice all over the board and stuff too. So in the interest of you know, they said it was the war that would be over by Christmas, but I don't really want to dwell on that too much, so to speak. I don't know, but anyway, I feel like this kind of matches with the color scheme of the map better. White, ivory, blue, black, and red, and then yellow dice for the poison gas dice. So that is what I will be doing, and I just figured I would kind of show off. I do like these blue dice; they're pretty cool. Anyway, so that is my little aesthetic change that I am doing. But onto the actual changes. Here we go. So setup changes. We are now changing it so that in our setup, Germany has 2 subs here. They start with 6 subs. We are now changing that so that they only start with 1 sub in CZone 8 as opposed to 2. So Germany will only start with 5 subs, not 6. I don't have 2 hands, but not 6. They only have 5 subs. Additionally, let me get that off there. Additionally, Germany can declare unrestricted submarine warfare in our game, but with kind of how games have progressed, a lot of times Germany doesn't end up using unrestricted submarine warfare. They just kind of hang on to it and as a threat for like the majority of the game and stuff. So to kind of entice them using it, and also because it does bring the U.S. into the war. If you declare unrestricted submarine warfare, Germany can only declare unrestricted submarine warfare until their 5th turn. After their 5th turn, they can't declare it anymore, and that ship has sailed. It's lost its effectiveness. The U.S. is at war. If they declare war at the U.S. earlier, they can still do unrestricted submarine warfare, but they can only declare it up until their 5th turn. Unrestricted submarine warfare means that German subs can attack with 3 dice and conduct convoys disruptions with 3 dice as well each. That hasn't changed. It's just that now they only have until round 5 to declare unrestricted submarine warfare. Over here in CZone 20, this has been the battle that has severely affected a lot of games, and we're doing some tweaks here, particularly how convoys work. So one thing we're doing is that we're changing convoys. When you roll dice for convoys, you know, it's 1 through 3 are hits, and then 4s through 6s are misses. And we liked that because, you know, it you could a misses was still a +1. So if you had the amount of needed warships, it wouldn't really matter how. You know, if you had like the max amount of ships, you wouldn't have to roll the dice, and theoretically it'd save time. But in the end, it ultimately does make things way too lopsided, both for Germany against Britain here, and also the Allies against the Ottoman Empire over here. So with how convoys work now, misses are just straight up misses. Okay, so we're gonna change the convoy disruption card. Misses will be 0, so you only convoy for how many hits you roll. Okay, so if you roll a 5, it's nothing. Okay, no money is sucked away from that. Additionally, with CZone 20, we are changing the British Navy starting setup, and this is what we are currently doing. Originally, it was 2 battleships, or not battleships, dreadnoughts. Originally, it was 2 dreadnoughts, 2 cruisers, a sub, and a transport. We are now changing it to 4 cruisers and 1 dreadnought. So we took away a dreadnought, we swapped it for some extra cruisers, yeah. So that's that starting setup change. Currently, we're happy with that. Then You see I got a bomber and a Zeppelin here. We are changing the prices of Zeppelins and bombers. Bombers, we had them at 11 IPCs. Zeppelins, we had at 9. We are now switching them. So Zeppelins cost 11. They cost 11 IPCs. Again, Germany can only have 2. And bombers now cost 9 IPCs. Okay? All right. Additionally, we're changing the way they work a little bit. Zeppelins and bombers can no longer participate in sea combat. And a big reasoning for this is that even though they can only, they only had 1 round of combat in sea combat, but it does skew the results of this battle significantly. And because Zeppelins are an expanded unit, meaning you don't necessarily need to have these to play the game, but they are in the starting setup. So an expanded unit should not affect a battle of that magnitude necessarily, right? They shouldn't. They can attack land. They can attack land territories, and they can do strategic bombing raids, but they cannot attack sea zones. Neither can bombers. The idea is that they're just simply not accurate enough. Additionally, now only Zeppelins can be air transports. Only Zeppelins can be air transports. Bombers, to be more historically accurate, reflective of the actual capacity at the time. A bomber could carry up to a few thousand pounds of bombs, but it could not. That doesn't translate to a significant amount of force of troops that they could carry. Troops are still moved by ships more than trucks and cavalry and so on and so forth, more than they were by bombers. You couldn't really put a significant amount of people onto a bomber. It just wasn't the style at the time, so to speak. Whereas a Zeppelin could certainly carry more people. So Zeppelins can still be air transports. Bombers cannot. Additionally, much like a Zeppelin needs to reload at a air base, bombers now need to do that as well. They start with a bomb, they use the bomb, and then they have to go back and reload their payload. And originally how we had that was, originally they could just reload automatically at any territory that they did not need an airship base to reload their bombs like Zeppelins do. Bombers, once they use their bomb, once they go and engage in combat, right, they don't have a payload anymore, and they have to land back in a city, in a friendly, controlled victory city, whether it's a major city or a minor city, and then they can get their bomb back or reload the bomb payload for the next turn. So if you have a bomber and you engage it in combat or a strategic bombing raid, but say it lands in Picardy, just as an example, well, on the next turn it has to go to Paris or Verdun if controlled, or back to London in order to get another payload on their next turn. So that is pretty significant change. Additionally, we're changing a little bit. Changing a little bit how submarines submerging work. So originally, a submarine could submerge. You could attack a territory, and you could opt to submerge. And once a submarine is submerged, you can't. The enemy can't force it to reemerge. It gets, it reemerges at the end, at the beginning of its next turn, so on and so forth. But to kind of encourage submerging a little bit, if players wish to do it as like a repositioning thing. Submerged submarines. Here, I'll get a submarine out here again. So if you say like attack a territory, or you are in a territory and somebody attacks you and you opt to submerge and they don't detect you, you can submerge, but you can either stay in the territory or you can go to any adjacent territory. You're basically like submerging and getting away, getting out of dodge from whatever is attacking you. If it's not a cruiser that's detecting you, you can move into any territory, sea zone, any adjacent sea zone. If there's mines, then you have to roll for them that are present, but you can move into any adjacent sea zone, and then they have to chase you down, basically. Hope I'm phrasing that right, but yeah, basically, like, so theoretically, like, say you had a German sub here and it goes 1, 2, you attack and you elect to submerge instead of fighting, then the submarine, even though it's gone 2 spaces already, it can go to like a third one, or it can go up to over here, right? Again, if you're submerging, you don't participate in combat, but you have to survive the battle in order to submerge. And it can be like you can position a little differently that way, right? Thinking how else to phrase this. Yes, and the idea is, yes, technically you can move 3 spaces, but think about this: when you attack a sea zone and you retreat, if this sub went 1, 2, and then decided to retreat from the battle, I mean, you're technically moving a 3rd sea zone, right? So that's basically the idea. So it's like 1, 2, 3, right? But if you submerge, you can do 1, 2, 3, even if there aren't any ships here that came from to that sea zone. So it's a little different from how retreats normally work. I hope I'm explaining that correctly. Feel free to ask questions in the comments. Trucks. This is an Italian truck here. This is actually a Japanese HBG truck, which actually works quite well too. So don't have to paint Italian trucks if you want to use them. Trucks are like cavalry now, and they do not necessarily need to be with an infantry. They can be by themselves, but like AAA and BBR, they can be captured. One single truck can be captured by the enemy if it's left undefended. Get rid of that too. Victory cities, minor cities, and major cities that start a line to your side do not count towards your side's victory points. So Ypres and Bucharest and Belgrade only count as victory points to the Central Powers. Likewise, Sofia only counts as a victory point to the Allies. So the Central Powers don't get that. Like it is aligned to them, but they don't get that as Sofia as a point. They get Belgrade as a point, but they don't get Sofia in Bulgaria, right? That's only to the Allies. That's only to the Central Powers. And same with Bucharest and Ypres. What else? Okay. Coming down. Oh, let's go over here. Russian Revolution point. The Central Powers now only receive the Russian Revolution point if they agree to the armistice. If they reach the Russian Revolution and they turn down the armistice, they don't get that point. We don't want to allow the Central Powers to essentially double dip with that one. If you turn down the armistice, you don't get the revolution point. Hey, sorry about that. I had to do a little cut there because I got a package that got delivered. It's always when I try to film that somebody hits the buzzer and my dog goes nuts. So I had to do a little cut there. Just left off with the Russian Revolution victory point adjustment. The Balkans victory point. This is one Madman and I are discussing doing. Currently, that is if whoever controls, likely the Central Powers, Serbia, Albania, Bulgaria, and Greece. They have to control all 4 of those. We're right now debating on whether or not to include Romania into that. I think it should be because Romania is technically a part of the Balkans, and it would just make it a little bit. If Central Powers are dominating over here, then the Allies don't necessarily have not a realistic chance. But depending on how this part of the world is going, then the Allies could come in here and disrupt the Balkans victory P in Romania. So I have that blue being that a blue chip, signifying that that's the change of what is in play, right? So that's that VP right there that I think should be changed. We're discussing that one. I think it just makes sense. But anyway, that's just me. In terms of, and then when we have one starting setup here while I'm in this corner of the world in the Balkans, we have a starting setup here change in Serbia. Madman has been very vocal about wanting to make Serbia tougher to take because realistically it was very difficult for Austria-Hungary. Like Bulgaria had to come in basically to allow the Central Powers to with their combined forces knock the Serbians out of Serbia into Albania and Montenegro and so on and so forth right there. So the change we have been doing is making an exception in terms of the number of units that start in Serbia. Similar to how Switzerland is a exception, even though it's 1 IPC. Switzerland gets 6 infantry there, so it's triple the amount of units they would normally have, or an additional 4 units that they have there. Likewise, In Serbia, Serbia has 3 IPCs, so it would get normally 1 infantry, not 1 infantry, 1 artillery and 5 infantry. We are boosting that an additional 4 units, additional 4 units. It's much like Serbia. So we are giving Serbia, to try it out, an additional 3 infantry and an artillery, making it a special exception in that regard. So the standing army in Serbia is now 6, 7, 8 infantry and 2 artillery in Serbia. And in our playtest, that means that it approximately takes around till round 3 instead of round 2 or even round 1 for Austria-Hungary to knock out Serbia. So that is a change to our starting setup. Again, 8 infantry, 2 artillery in Serbia, which again become Russian if once attacked, which they have to be attacked in the beginning of the game. So essentially that's additional Russian units there in Serbia. What else? Okay, the Black Sea victory point. All right, so originally the Black Sea victory point is Marmara. Whoever controls Marmara, Crimea, and there's no enemy sea units in sea zones 34 and 33. That was the original Black Sea victory point. We are adding control of Caucasus and control of northern Anatolia into that victory point. So in order for the Central Powers or the Allied powers to have that victory point, they need to control Crimea, Marmara, Caucasus, northern Anatolia, and no enemy sea units in those 2 sea zones. So that is the adjustment right there. Let's see. While I'm on the subject of victory points, okay, we got this big one in the Pacific. The Pacific Colonies victory point. This one is going to be changed a bit to be more expansive. What I mean by that is, see all the blue chips I got here? These were the original territories that were composed of for the Pacific Colonies. Originally, it was Allied control of all German colonies. Actually, 1 second. That should be a blue one. Okay, so originally it was all Allied control of all original German colonies in or adjacent to the Pacific, or German control of any one of those territories. We are changing it to control of all original. I'm trying to think of how to phrase this off the top of my head. All original colony territories of the Central Powers, Germany, or the Allied powers, or Central Power control of any one of those territories. So in order for the Allies to get this victory point, all of these chips, all those blue chips, and all of these chips in or adjacent to the Pacific Ocean count to that victory point. So if the Germans lose all their victory points, but by the end of the game they have the Philippines, or if the Ottomans somehow come over here and they snag Malaya, the Central Power, at the end of the game, and the Allies control everything else, or per se if Germany somehow controls Guam by the end of the game, that's a victory point. They get that victory point, the Allies don't get that victory point. The Allies have to control, again, it's all colonies, right? It's not original territories. So mainland Japan doesn't count to that. The Russian territories up here don't count. Mainland US doesn't count. None of these count because they're not original colony territories. But like Alaska, which was not a state then, British Columbia, Central America, Pitcairn Islands, French Polynesia, they control those by the end of the game. If they have a presence in an original colony territory, if the Central Powers control any of those territories, then the Central Powers get a point, get that victory point. The Allies don't. The Allies have to have universal, total control of the Allied original colonies in the Pacific. And that, it stems down to, we consider the Pacific Ocean essentially here. So Southern Australia doesn't count because that's part of the Indian Ocean, but all these territories on Australia count. New Zealand counts. All these islands count. Yeah, that is the change in the Pacific VP, the Pacific Colonies VP. Likewise, Taiwan counts because it's a Japanese colony. Korea and Darien count. French Indonesia count. China does not count because it's not a original Allied colony. Same for the Dutch colonies down here. Those wouldn't count because the Dutch do not start or they're not a Allied power by default, right? Yeah, so there's that VP change. And I think that's the end of the VP changes. Everything else is a little more. Oh yeah. Trindade. We originally, just for the sake of gameplay, lumped Trindade into the Pacific Colonies VP. That is removed. So it really just affects that German colony NO, national objective. So Trindade no longer is lumped into the Pacific Colonies VP. So there we go. Okay. Let me get those two. Okay. If you watched our game, we had a few things during the Russian Civil War. If Finland is contested when the Russian Civil War, when the Russian armistice is agreed to, if there are units there and it's German units or Central Power units there and it's contested, that means that they don't have to because they don't have to necessarily retreat out of Finland. But that does mean that the Finnish units, because they are vying for their independence, there will be 3. If it's contested, there's going to be 3 Allied infantry and artillery that go down there, and if they want to keep fighting in Finland and take control of that, they have to fight those units that pop up there that are vying for their independence. If Finland isn't contested, then it becomes a minor neutral power, right, and receives those units. They're just not aligned to anybody, and then they would have to be attacked. So that's normal, but now, or that's an original rule, but now, again, if it's contested, then the Allies get to choose who gets to represent the Finnish forces that pop up there. Okay. Likewise, over here with the Russian Civil War, Mongolia cannot be aligned. The Mongolian units and territories cannot be aligned by the Soviets. They can only be aligned by the whites. China can come in here and attack Mongolia. The Allies and everybody can fight the Chinese factions in Mongolia to take control of those territories without violating the rules regarding China. And that would be a way to prevent these from going to the whites. If the Republic of China comes up here and attacks Mongolia, then they would get aligned to the Empire of China instead of the whites, if they decide to do that. So they could do that, but then the whites can still come in here and take control of these territories and get that IPC. But yeah, the Soviets, just the way we had it before, with the Soviets going first, the Soviets can theoretically come in here and take all of these territories and this IPC on the first turn because they now go first, and it's not a roll-off like we used to have it. So we just felt that was really unfair, especially at the beginning at Tannenberg when we first did it, and it just didn't feel right. And I looked into it more, and the Soviets, they wanted to stay in their own. They wanted to stay in Russian territories. They didn't want to come off as imperialist, right? So they didn't come in here until the whites came in here. So yeah, that's the change there. And it's just more balanced and more fair to the whites because the Soviets, for the most part, get a huge help with their national objective and such. And depending on how the layout over there starts, it just makes more sense for this, for a little adjustment to Mongolia. So the Soviets, if they attack Mongolia, it gets aligned to the whites automatically, all 3 territories. Otherwise, the Russians have to align them 1 territory at a time. Setup changes. We now have 5 infantry in central Japan. We moved one of them to Darien. I'm not really sure how to pronounce this. Darien. Let's just say Darien. So 1 infantry is there, and we moved the cavalry from mainland Japan to Korea. So there's that. Also, if the Central Powers declare war on Japan without declaring war on Britain, then Britain can declare war on them. Okay, they can't. It's not like a little workaround that they can neuter Japan without bringing Britain in. I did research this, and they had a pact. They definitely had a pact pre-war in regards to that. If Japan was at war with more than one power, which they would be automatically if, say, Germany declares war on them, then that means they're at war with Austria-Hungary, right? So if Japan was attacked, Britain would come to their rescue. We are changing the German cruisers a little bit. The cruiser that we had off of in Season 73, we are moving that cruiser to Season 51 with the other cruiser here, the other German cruiser, and then we have these cruisers still in the starting setup. So now that since there's 4 German cruisers here, we gave Japan a sub in case they all decide to attack the Japanese Navy there and try to neuter them that way. They now have a sub, so one of those cruisers has to roll to 2. Additionally, we've given Austria, to kind of spice things up a little bit, there was historically one Austrian cruiser here off Qingdao, and we kind of debated about including it, but for gameplay, just so that it's not like all of one unit that we can attack at once, we're adding an Austrian cruiser here in Season 51, and actually it is kind of fun. So yeah, add an Austrian cruiser here to Season 51. To balance that out, we are adding a French cruiser here in Season 42. So that's kind of cool. It actually makes this a little more interesting in this part of the world. The British, here, I'll just move them up here right now. Apologies for the cut right there. Once again, my phone crashed while I was recording, and it actually saved up until that point, and I kept going, so I have to backtrack a little bit with the changes, but I was almost done. Anyway, so yes, so basically the cruiser and transport, the British cruiser and transport here in Season 31, we're moving the transport over to 42 and the cruiser down to 38 because since Austria-Hungary can bypass the mines, it makes this a scripted move to not declare war on Italy so that they can do that and just automatically kill that with one dreadnought and a cruiser versus a cruiser and an unpaired transport. And out of box, they can't do that, and Britain, needs to be able to, Britain should be able to have that in play for their first turn, or that cruiser and transport in play for their first turn, theoretically at least, right? So so they have to be moved from there, because otherwise, we want to combat a scripted move, because that's going to be like an easy, scripted move on every single turn, and Britain should have a second transport to start the game in this region. Granted, there is a German cruiser here in 38, so they can try to pot shot it if they want to declare war. They can pot shot, and but at least it's a fair fight of a German cruiser against a French cruiser and that transport. So at least there's that, and then this cruiser gives them some variation to either go that way, or they can go that way, or go that way, etc. Or the German cruiser can fight this one and this can chase it down, etc., etc. So that's what we're doing there. These are the new roundels for the 2 Chinese factions. Now again, if they whoever side wins, or if China gets united, they use this roundel because China is united. But to represent the different factions, this is now the Republic of China. This is the Empire of China, which kind of swapped it to these, swapped to this one at least during Operation Tannenberg. But just so it's officially clear to everybody who's watching this, these are the new roundels we are using for the 2 Chinese factions. I've already covered my dice, so let me get that out of here. We are going to be giving, or at least we're toying around with the idea of giving France a national objective that is actually obtainable for them for the beginning of the game. So if France controls all of their original territories in Africa, so that's, Tunisia, Algeria, Morocco, French West Africa, Togo, not Togoland, French Equatorial Africa, and Madagascar, if they control all those, and they control these 2 German colonies, Togoland and Cameroon, then they get a national objective of +3. It's actually +5 if you think about it, because they would control these 2. But yeah, basically that is what we're doing to give France a little bit of extra money to play with at the beginning of the game. If they do those, if Britain comes in here and snags these, well then France won't get those. But yeah, so France has to come into those 2 territories, so they have kind of like a universal control here with the Allies. If Germany controls either Nigeria or Gold Coast, but France controls controls these. You know, this does not affect the NOs because those are British territories. Slight rule clarification and change: any tanks that participate in an amphibious assault do not absorb hits from minefields, and they do not knock out the effect of barbed wire. So that is a little modification there. We are adding an Italian cavalry in Somaliland, and we like that little addition quite a bit. Gives that guy some movement and ability to do a few other things. Excuse me. Other setup changes. This military base for Germany and Germany East Africa is so significant, and we've had a lot of games where they get it on the first turn, and the thing is, if they don't get this on the first turn, then Germany, or the Central Powers in general, don't have any real chance at the Africa point. So to keep things interesting and keep the significance of how much this tied up the Allies, we are incorporating this military base into the Germany East Africa setup. To compensate, we are also giving a naval base to Britain in Union of South Africa and in Egypt, or a military base in Egypt. So they can potentially build naval units out of here, but in practice, because this ties up Britain so much, they end up having to build land units out of here generally instead of naval units. And if Germany takes this, then that gets destroyed. So that doesn't benefit. This naval port being present doesn't benefit Germany. That isn't this being destroyed is not an addition. It's just an explanation. That is still a older rule. If you take a territory with a base, it gets destroyed. A military base or a naval port, it gets destroyed. We're also adding a military base in Egypt so that the Allies can actually theoretically get stuff going here. It seems to be so critical for the most part. And the naval port down here means a naval port having to go in India is less critical as well. So yeah, those are added to the starting setup. Now let's go over here. These are the last two things I got to talk about. Tech. So each power begins with one field technology token free, and they can buy more. However, there is now a cap. You can only buy a maximum of one technology a turn, a field technology token a turn, and you can have a max of 3. If you have 3 at the start of your turn, you can't buy anymore. So Germany can't, in the first turn, have one technology token and then buy 2 or 3 or 4 or however many right off the bat to give them an absurd amount of field technology at once. So that is the cap. Each field technology token could possibly get you up to 2 field technologies, so that is the cap. If you keep getting hosed on your technology token rolls, well, this is the maximum amount you can get, and hopefully you get a payoff, you know. All right, and last but not least is the discussion of military bases and naval ports. We've long had some clamoring or a desire from several people, Man himself, in terms of how, you know, whether they should be field technologies, whether you should be able to buy them, and we've been trying to figure out what seems and feels appropriate. First things first, naval ports can now, originally we had it so military bases and naval ports could build up to 3 units each. That's still the same for military bases, but naval ports can only build up to a maximum of 2 C units. They can still repair a friendly dreadnought, but they can only build a maximum of 2. And again, you have to, if you're not familiar with the rule, you can build a maximum of the IPC value of the territory that you place them in. So if France built a military base in Tunisia or got one via tech, they could only build 1 unit there, theoretically, right? Okay, so naval ports can only build 2, which means if Britain gets one here, there's 4 IPCs here, they can build 2 C units and 2 land units. Or any combination of that, but they can only build a maximum of 4 units there a turn, and 2 of them can be C units. Does that make sense? Okay. Military bases can still build 3 land units, but they can only build cavalry, infantry, or trucks. And military bases can now be purchased. This is the idea that we have. You can either hope to get lucky via tech, and if you get one of these via tech, you have to place it in an original controlled territory. Originally controlled territory that is controlled, that can't be contested, etc. However, if you feel like buying them, and the cost is going to be 15 IPCs for a military base, or 20 IPCs for a naval port. If you feel like buying them, you can place them in minor aligned territories. So if Germany comes in and aligns Chile on their next turn, they can, this provided they still control Chile, they can place a military base there, or a naval port even. But they have to throw down a lot of money. In terms of the cost and reasoning for the cost of these, so this explains the cost. So basically, a military base can build up to, in one turn, theoretically, can build 12 IPCs worth of units for as the most expensive units they can buy for cavalry, 3 cavalry, and then add 3, so that's 12 IPCs, add 3 IPCs for representing the number of units they can build, that gets you 15. Naval ports, you can, the most expensive units you could build would be 2 cruisers, which is 9 IPCs apiece, would be 18 IPCs, plus 2 IPCs for the number of units they can build. And there you go. So that is why naval ports are 20 and military bases are 15. And that covers the current Kings and Kaisers changes, adjustments that I have to discuss. And I will, of course, have a description in the video description. I will have a Cliff Notes text version of all of this. So there you go. That is the changes making its way into Kings and Kaisers 1.5, and after BBR Chicago, Madman and I will get going on getting the rule that implemented into the rule book, and play test a little bit to make sure we like everything. But those are the things we are talking about and considering. And I encourage, if you're playing a Kings and Kaisers game, if you do play a Kings and Kaisers game, I encourage you to play with most, or if not all of those, because most of those will very likely, if not all of them, will make it into the next rule book. So those are the changes we are working with, and yeah, kind of go from there. But thanks for watching. Stay tuned in the future for more Kings and Kaisers stuff, but also stay tuned for more BBR stuff. Of course, we got BBR Chicago happening in 8 days. Super excited to roll some dice and see a bunch of familiar faces and all that. But yeah, stay tuned as always, and have fun rolling some dice.